to what's being said during this, and then what I want to tell you beyond that will make a lot more sense. All right, so pay good attention for 15 minutes. Even though it's mainstream media, it's an incredibly important message, and they got it right for once. Okay?
Remember dairy farmer Alan Smith, written off as dead by his doctors. His family insisted on intravenous vitamin C, and Alan survived. Well, after that story last month, there was a clamour throughout the country. Families of swine flu victims demanded the same treatment. As Melanie Reid reports, they want to know, why can't we try it?
I'm not saying go out there and get the vitamin C and everything's going to be okay, because we don't know that. I don't know that. We never got the chance.
While 57-year-old Bob Goodwin was on life support battling swine flu, his son James was battling the hospital, trying to get intravenous vitamin C administered to his dad.
I still believe that my father didn't die. There's something else happened. He never died. He just didn't get given the chance to live.
I'll stop. We're going to play another one.
This is the one that followed. I want you to see the first one.
That's part of it, but just give me 2 seconds. That's all right. 2 seconds. We're on.
Farmer Alan Smith, written...
That's the one. Some of you may have seen this. Pay good attention, mate. Your life might depend on it.
It comes up with the same one.
What's that?
It comes up with the same one. The same docker. Okay, give me your phone. Alright. Andrew's just going to talk, and I'm going to see if I can find it off his phone.
Alright, okay.
You bring it up on the phone and I'll find it. Okay, Andrew's going to talk and I'm going to hunt it down for you. It's the same one, Andrew.
Alright.
It's the exact same one. It's the exact same one.
Is it?
So we were on the right video.
No, this...
You want me to play
Wait a
it?
second. Oh, no, I've got the wrong one. Just give me a second. I really want people to see this.
Okay.
Sorry. You know they say about proper preparation prevents poor performance. I think this is a case. Yeah, that's a follow one. I just website expired. Eh? I'll just oh, hang on.
There was one that I saw where he was in hospital and all that. Is that the video?
Yeah.
The guy with the tube in his mouth?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, I did see that one.
Okay.
I'll randomly get it and put it up.
Okay. All right. Listen, before we get started, are most people here because you want medical information on cannabis on a particular condition? Is that the majority of people? All right. While we're waiting to get this happening, does someone want to ask a particular question so it can be more responsive to... Okay, we'll start with you.
Why in this country and many other countries already done forward thinking, in the UK about
Yeah. When you look at the history of Australia, like going back into the 20s and 30s, Australia was often seen as a highly progressive, socially forward country. Like Australians introduced a lot of legislation that was novel at the time, 40-hour week, universal age pension, medical coverage, all these sorts of things. There was a lot of progressive, there was a lot of nasty things about Australian past too. We can't whitewash the whole lot. But it was a relatively progressive country. We're also a country most people don't know in the 50s that was rather industrially advanced. Right? Is everyone aware that Australia developed the first digital computer in the 50s? And bloody Bob Menzies put it in a box and sent it to England, saying we got wool, we didn't need these sorts of things. Right? We had a fairly advanced aerospace industry. Not only the Woomera test range, we developed the over-the-horizon radar, the Jindalee radar. There was a lot of industrial things. In the last 20 years, especially under the influence of conservative governments, there's been a progressive degradation of the quality of Australian politics. Like there was a time when say you were overseas, where you say you're proud to be an Australian, because we were often there on the human rights issues, we're there with looking after people, all this sort of stuff. Now we're known overseas as a country that locks children up in tropical islands and causes refugees to sew their mouths together in frustration, right? Australia has lost the plot, right? We're now in the grip of what I call a soft form of fascism, a pharmaco-fascism, right, led by a media that trumpets a series of lies, right? Now, your question is, why are we that way? And I have to fall back on cliches. They say the only thing it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So the inference is the good people of Australia have done nothing or not enough. And we're now losing control of our future. And that's a really serious situation to be in, right? Because without the future, what have we got? We're putting the lives and well-being of our children at grave risk, right? We're in a situation where the children being born now may not live as long as their parents, whereas we certainly live longer. Each generation had a longevity and a quality of life improvement over the ones before it, but that's over, right? So evil forces in the corporate, in the media, in the security industries have taken over Australia. In the last 2 years, there's been 72 suppression orders that have been made, suppression laws that have been made to stop people getting access to the truth. They basically gutted freedom of information. I'll just give you an example of freedom of information, because if you don't have freedom of information, what have you got? A little while ago, when we were trying to get hemp licences going, I applied to the government. They stalled us for a couple of years, so I applied for an FOI to the department to see who was holding it up so we could get to see what the correspondence was. I had to pay $700 in advance before you got the report. And when it finally came out something like 8 months later, there was a great sheath of documents, but they were all heavily redacted. But when I looked through them, they were all letters that I had sent to the department. But these clowns on my freedom of information had sent me back my own letters but redacted them. Right? We're paying these idiots money, right? You ask me why we're doing that, right? We've lost control of our future. That's the problem. We don't really have a say, right? The political opposition in this country doesn't really exist. It's become a Tweedledee and Tweedledum. It's really, really sad. But I wish I could answer why that is. But it's because, they say the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We simply haven't done enough. We haven't spoken up. We've remained quiet when we should be speaking for fear or looking after your job or looking after your reputation or something like that. And that's the way it goes. And now we're very much behind the 8 ball in global terms, and it is a serious situation. Is this it?
Well, that's the only one I've got other than this.
I think they've taken it down. Listen, I'll just have to talk about it then. Next time I'll be better prepared. It looks like it's been taken down, the one I want. I'll tell you what the story is, because it may well apply over the next few years. There's certain conditions that aren't amenable to cannabis treatment. I mean, we're aware of the broad application of cannabis in all sorts of things, from cancer through to anxiety states, chronic pain, inflammatory bowel disease. But something like an acute virus, say influenza, and this touches on the whole issue with immunisation and vaccination debate, and especially the reduction in the capacity to have exemptions from immunisation. Right, now, just to put you in the picture, my MD or my PhD is in immunopathology. Right, so I mean, it's a funny sort of dilemma I find myself in. Is that? Oh, that's it? Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, I really want you to see this.
You just missed a few seconds of it, so we'll just put it and get the gist of it.
This is Aotearoa farmer Alan Smith in Auckland's intensive care unit shortly before the doctors told his family his life support should be turned off and he be allowed to die.
And I just sort of backed up and looked at him laying there so helpless, and you know, he was my whole life. We've been together since we were both 16.
On the Smiths' Aotearoa farm, Alan's wife Sonia and son Shane remember when they were told it was all over.
I was, you know, speechless. I mean, it was like, your dad's the sort of person that you could always rely on him to be there to help you, and it was like, shit.
Childhood sweethearts Sonia and Alan were married when they were both 17. They have 3 sons. Their 9th grandchild was on the way when Alan got a severe case of swine flu.
He was always there to help us with anything. And it was just, yeah, I mean, what were we going to do?
And he wasn't very old, eh?
No, only at 56.
But on the other side of the house, over the back paddock, having been taken on an aerial check out of the farm, the bloke they're calling the Miracle Man. Looking anything but dead.
Alan!
Hello.
You're not doing too bad for a guy that was meant to be 6 foot under.
Well, apparently I was supposed to be turned off about over a year ago now it was. Yes.
We're going to turn the machine off that was keeping you alive.
So we're going to turn the machine off and...
Alan Smith's survival has been described as one of the most remarkable and controversial turnarounds in New Zealand medical history.
Feel lucky to be alive?
I am very lucky. They tell me I'm not a 1 in a million, I'm 1 in a billion to live.
Alan's story began on June 28, 2009. He arrived at Auckland International Airport after a fishing trip with mates in Fiji. He caught a connecting flight to Tauranga where his launch is moored and was joined by his wife Sonia.
I woke up in the night and he was really hot, so I gave him some Panadol and that cooled him off a bit much, because later on he was so... I woke up again and he was just like, he was laying there just stone cold and just laying there still as, and I thought, oh God, the first thing that came to my mind was, God, he's dead.
In Tauranga Hospital, Alan was swabbed for swine flu. After 2 days, his deterioration was so dramatic, the 3 sons and 8 grandchildren arrived, warned this could be a final goodbye.
Just seeing him just in an induced coma and everything like that just was horrible. I mean, yet that was the beginning.
A specialist crew flew in from Auckland with a portable ECMO machine, a complex life support system which takes over the function of the lungs. All the grandkids had surrounded their papa before he was airlifted north.
No, still alive. My papa, they said.
Oh, then what happened? They stood waving at him.
They lined the corridor.
Oh, when he was taken out?
When he was taken out the stretcher, yeah. Then I waved goodbye to the helicopter.
Yeah. In the hospital?
Yeah.
It's just the Wi-Fi internet land. You're getting the gist of the story anyway.
whatever technical difficulties, it's worth just
jump it in a sec. Something like YouTube.
Yeah, from the hospital as they took him away.
And you must have been thinking, the chances aren't good.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was then I was starting to think, well, you know, where are we going to go with this?
As Alan lay in a coma in Auckland Hospital, heavily medicated, ECMO and other machines keeping him alive, Sonia began a detailed diary.
Saturday, 4th of July. Told this morning that it's 100% swine flu with no other bacteria. He is worst case in New Zealand and Aussie to be put on an ECMO machine. X-ray chest, whole lungs clouded out.
These are those clouded out X-rays. Alan developed what's known as whiteout pneumonia. This is when the lungs can't be seen by X-ray, so full of infected fluids they are unable to take in any air whatsoever. For weeks on end, Alan's condition changed little, hovering close to death.
When it got to 3 weeks, it was really getting scary then.
Just as the family thought things couldn't get any worse, Alan was diagnosed with hairy cell leukemia. Auckland Hospital notes to the family say,
"The type of leukemia Mr. Smith has is potentially treatable if that's all he had. However, with his lung failure, Mr. Smith cannot survive."
Monday the 20th of July, United States specialist came. Alan still same, asked for meeting at 3 p.m. Told us they were going to turn off life support.
While Auckland Hospital refused to take part in this story, 60 Minutes has obtained Alan Smith's medical files and records of that Monday meeting.
This morning, we, the CVICU consultants, met and discussed with the ECMO specialist from America, Mr. Smith's situation. The group is in unanimous agreement that Mr. Smith should be removed from ECMO and be allowed to die. Continuing is only prolonging his inevitable death.
My brother just stepped in and he said, no, you haven't tried everything. You've got to try vitamin C intravenously, high doses. And they just said, no.
The family pleaded with doctors that Alan be administered high-dose vitamin C, a treatment right outside of mainstream medicine. So what was the doctor's reaction?
Oh, they said no because there's no proof of it doing anything or doing anyone any good. Or my mind was just spinning because they wanted to turn him off, and I'm thinking, well, I hope we can get through this. And with that, Paul and Shane walked in.
That's your sons?
Yes, two of our boys. They walked in and then, you know, they really stood their ground. So
I said to him, mate, I said, if you lie on that bed for as long as he had, without vitamin C, you will die too, just like he's going to.
They Paul and Shane rang and told me, they said, like, giving up, just like when you got a dead cow down, it's, I said, well...
They'd given up.
I said, just force this vitamin C in them so it actually happens. And
it'd be fair to say the Smith boys, Paul, Josh and Shane, weren't backwards in coming forward.
I says, what have you got to lose, mate? You give me one good reason what you guys have got to lose by trying it. I says, because it's not fair that we, all of us, should go on living our lives with the thought in the back of our minds, you know, if only we'd pushed and tried harder, would it have saved them?
They were all about to find out if they'd pushed hard enough. The next day, Tuesday, Auckland Hospital arranged another family meeting.
All of intensive care unit medical staff have met again. We are all in agreement that vitamin C will be of no benefit. we all agree Mr. Smith will not survive. However, one member feels slightly uneasy that we should wait a little longer before taking Mr. Smith off ECMO. It's therefore reasonable to wait until Friday. If Mr. Smith has shown no improvement by then, he will be taken off ECMO. In the meantime, given the family's strong beliefs about vitamin C, we are willing to give this over the next 2 days.
So, Tuesday night, he got his first dose of 25 grams through the IV. And Wednesday morning, he got another 25 grams. The Wednesday afternoon, they did a CT scan on his chest, and that's when they found the air pockets in his lungs, whereas the x-rays had showed just complete white.
So, Alan's x-rays. Before high-dose intravenous vitamin C, so full of infected fluid, the lungs can't be seen. This x-ray taken after 2 days of high-dose vitamin C treatment. The lungs dramatically improved and readily visible. By D-Day, the Friday when Alan Smith was destined to die, when the ECMO life support was to be withdrawn, turned out to be the day Alan Smith was destined to, well, maybe survive.
Mr. Smith is stable but still critical. He has improved over the last couple of days. Turning Mr. Smith prone has probably made the biggest difference. His chest x-ray is better.
They didn't agree or believe that the vitamin C turned him around because...
What did they think turned him around?
Coincidentally, the same time as he started getting his vitamin C, they proned him, which was turning him over onto his stomach. So that's their argument on... That's why he got better. So, my question to that is, why didn't you try that before even suggesting to turn the machine off?
So, less than a week after the high-dose vitamin C was started, Alan had improved to the point that he could be taken off ECMO life support.
Sunday, 26th July. Got taken off ECMO this morning today, hooray. Seems funny seeing him breathing again. He is taking a few of his breaths on his own.
Then, just as the family felt they could breathe a bit easy themselves, Alan's health started to dive. They would find the vitamin C had been stopped.
This time, a different consultant was there, and he was just so adamant against it. He sat back in his chair, rolled his eyes and crossed his arms and looked at the ceiling and said, "No, not putting him back on it. No."
Did he make you feel like a bit of an idiot?
He did, and it's the first time I ever wanted to hit someone.
I got quite serious with that doctor.
How serious?
The meeting was stopped, put it that way.
3 days later, the vitamin C was restarted, but only very low doses of 1 gram twice a day.
So we got them all in one mob, not 2 mobs?
Now, while these King Country brothers certainly don't claim to be medical experts, they say the mucking about with the vitamin C was reflected by the changes in their father's health. And they say you'd have to be a bit thick not to see what was going on.
So he was on 100 grams per day, improving rapidly, very rapidly. And then he went downhill rapidly when they stopped it, cold turkey. When he got put back on vitamin C after that heated meeting, it was at a very low dose. And once again he started recovering, but it was a slow recovery. They expected to have him transferred to Waikato in less than a week. It took a lot longer.
By early August, still critical and still in an induced coma, but by now breathing on a ventilator, Alan was airlifted closer to home, to intensive care at Waikato Hospital, who, like Auckland Hospital, wouldn't be interviewed. It was here the Smith family found they had another scrap on their hands.
A doctor comes on and stops it. And
stops the vitamin C?
Stops the vitamin C.
And he says what?
And I said, you know, why? And he said, well, this stuff has come down with him and we don't know what it is. So here we go again, another fight.
This time they brought in the heavyweights. Wellington public law specialist May Chen warned Waikato Hospital.
The decision to discontinue the high-dose intravenous vitamin C treatment without consulting with Alan's family is in breach of Right 7 of the Health and Disability Commissioner's Code of...
There was even a threat, wasn't there, that you would go to the High Court?
Yes, we would. Well, this is someone's life we're dealing with, not just anything, you know. Once he's dead, you can't get him back. And we weren't going to let that happen.
So they agreed to give him a couple of grams of vitamin C a day?
Yeah.
And you wanted him to be on like 50 grams a day?
That's right. Yeah.
So they kind of said, yes, we'll do it, but didn't really do it anyway?
No, that's right.
Slowly recovered, and it wasn't until we got some oral lipospheric vitamin C into him, and that's when he once again recovered really fast.
After a total of 9 weeks in a coma, Alan eventually was woken, which is when Sonia began administering vitamin C to Alan herself, using a special high-dose oral form known as lipospheric. The next step was meant to be months of rehabilitation.
Yeah, I was taking 6 grams of that a day, of the lipospheric. And of course, when I had to go to rehab again to learn to walk, I was told I'd be there for 3 months. Well, in 3 months, I did not like the sound of that. But I walked out of that hospital in 1 day under 14 days. And even the doctors were absolutely disbelieved that I could come right so quick.
Alan was back on the farm recuperating when his neighbour John came down the road calling out to him.
Says to me, "Hey, Smithy, you owe me $15. I said, "What do I owe you $15 for, John?" He said, "I went and got me suit dry cleaned for your funeral, and you bugger, you've come back." Get him behind.
Alan Smith's comeback is being talked about around the world, described as little short of miraculous. Alan himself says he's living proof the establishment should be taking high-dose vitamin C seriously, and sooner rather than later. And just a short flight away, his launch in Tauranga. You know, Alan, that there will be many health professionals who say that it is not scientifically possible that your recovery is because of having high doses of intravenous vitamin C.
Well, they can say what they like, really, because basically I am alive. I was supposed to be dead. They wanted to turn me off. And here I am, I'm alive.
Well done.
Yeah.
Just a note, Alan Smith no longer shows any signs of having leukemia.
I've beaten the system, as to speak. And, you know, if my family had let them turn me off, I would be dead.
It's not a good day to be dead today.
Not a good day to be dead today. There's obviously a fish out there somewhere with my name on it. We don't catch it.
Okay, thanks, sister.
Dairy farmer.
What a story.
Now,
How did they find out about the vitamin C?
what's that?
How did they find out about the vitamin C?
Ah, right. One thing about the world, all the information's out there, and it turns out when you actually look at the literature, there's been tons of research done on vitamin C intravenously, especially by Dr. Klenner in 1949. He wrote a book on the subject, right? And he treated things like extreme things like tetanus and polio and things like that, and generally had stunning results, right? I mean, I'm harping on about this because, as I said, I think it can be a lifesaver. It's highly likely in the next little while we'll have a pandemic of influenza, right? Are you familiar with those terms? Pandemic is when we have a worldwide epidemic, whether it's swine flu or any of the other variants. Now, the system, the important thing, and the reason why I wanted you to sit through that, was we're dealing with a medical system that operates on dogma, not on fact. Right? Scientists are meant to have no opinion on anything. Right? People ask me, what do I believe in? Or I believe in this, or do I believe in that? I said, I don't believe in anything, but I look at facts, I look at data, I look at results, and then I hold an opinion. But that opinion only lasts as long as the data supports it. So if enough things contradict that opinion, the opinion is now a disproved opinion, and I replace it with something better. But you saw the case here. They believed that vitamin C would have no use. Even in the presence of a stunning clinical reversal, they invented excuses for other reasons. Oh, it's because we turned him, right? Yeah, so to answer your question, how did they know about it? They investigated, right? They were desperate because their father was going down the tubes. And that's the sort of thing that a loyal family really should do. It's not the only case. There's a famous doctor in this country, Andrew Katelaris. Have I spoken about him before to this group? No, Archie was a well-intended GP that went out to Colerenabri back in the early 1960s. He was dealing with a largely Aboriginal population. When he got there, the mortality rate was, infant mortality rate was 50%. That means 50% of the children died before their first birthday. This is in Australia. 50% of the children died before their first birthday, and he wrote a book entitled Every Second Child, which reflects that. What he did when he first got there was thought, oh, I better start immunising the kids. So he started immunising them, but he found that the death rate actually went up instead of down, and he was most distressed. Luckily, he consulted with a physician, Dr. Harbour, who was a very wise old physician and not misled by dogma. I remember, people are meant to have an open mind. You say a mind's like a parachute. It only works when it's open. As soon as you start limiting the way you receive data and you have a belief system, you can't possibly be a good scientist. Right? You'll be a good little mouthpiece, but you won't be a good scientist. Anyway, this fellow said, look, I think these children have an acute vitamin C deficiency. An acute vitamin C deficiency is different than scurvy. Scurvy is a chronic vitamin C deficiency, and one that over time leads to very easily recognisable changes in the skeleton and bleeding gums and different things like that, which are very easily recognised from all the experience we had with sailors. And most people are familiar with Captain Cook was meant to have cured scurvy by giving his men citrus, but that's not true at all. Because to save space, they squeezed all the limes and boiled them down to a paste, and in doing so, they destroyed all the vitamin C. He gave his men sauerkraut as well, and it was the sauerkraut that had the vitamin C in it. But anyway, good try, Mr. Cook. All right, he got the same result, even if he didn't do it for the right reason. But Archie then started supplementing the children in Colerenabri community with vitamin C, and in the space of 2 years, vitamin C and zinc and a few other nutrients, as well as generally trying to improve their diet. Remember, a lot of the people on the reservations and things were living on white bread and canned meat. It was a pretty disgusting sort of diet. Long story short, within 2 years, he got the death rate down to 0. So it went from 50%, every second child dying before their first birthday, to no children dying. And you know what his reward from the health department was? He was deregistered, right? Because he was critical of the government for allowing this situation to go, and he sort of mouthed off, so he was deregistered. That really ties in with what I showed you here. Doctors, and especially the oncologists, have a mindset that their approach to disease is the only possible approach. For years, starting in about 2001, I was working in a cancer hospital, North Shore Private Hospital, that did a lot of brain surgery for glioblastomas. And it was clear to me that they should be trying cannabis medicine, even with conventional surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, as a way of extending their life. But there was no way the people would even listen to me. I tried many things. I tried to get a program going with just better nutrition pre-operatively, because we were running pre-operative clinics where you saw the patient 2 or 3 weeks beforehand to check on their heart and their lungs and things like that and work out whether they were fit for surgery. And I thought, here's a great opportunity we'll put these on a certain diet and we'll see if they have less post-operative complications. There was no interest at all. It was stamped on. We don't do that sort of thing here, right? So we're dealing with ideologues that want to maintain the system. And the system is that you take their medicine, you suffer their side effects, and then you take some more medicine, right? I don't want to damn all of allopathic medicine, but it hasn't delivered on what it's said to deliver, which is better health. By almost all parameters of health, the population's health is getting worse. Like, why should we listen to a dietitian who gave us the food pyramid? You remember the food pyramid? Carbohydrates at the base, and then the protein, then the fats and oils. It's led to an epidemic of obesity and metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, right? But yet they persist. And we've got dietitians. Are you all familiar with a case in Tasmania? A surgeon who got tired of cutting the legs off his diabetic patients started giving them dietary advice, saying, cut down on the sugar, mate, don't have so much white bread. He was taken to the HCCC, the Healthcare Complaints Unit, by the Dietetics Association, who informed him that he was practising outside of area expertise, and only the dietitians could give dietary advice, right? We live in mad times. Right, but I'll come back to vitamin C because, like I said before, we can expect a pandemic. It's almost inevitable. Now, the way they do influenza immunisation, and pay attention to this because, as I said, it's going to impact on all of us in the near future at an unpredictable time. Most people are probably aware of the Spanish flu that occurred in 1919 after the Second World War. It killed more people than the First World War. So it gives you an idea of the severity that influenza can do when it mutates. Now, there's different ways to vaccinate or immunise people against disease. The influenza virus has a core, what we call a core antigen, and an antigen just means something that provokes an antibody response. So it can have a core antigen and surface antigens. You remember this one, they said the swine flu was H1N1. They stand for chemicals called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, right? And there's many different varieties. There might be 20 of each. So you can have an H1N1 or an H10N10 and any variety in between. So there's hundreds and hundreds of different varieties. Now, about 15 years ago, Australian scientists came up with an immunisation against the core antigen. And the core doesn't change from one year to the next. And instead of giving it by needle, which is not the way you catch influenza, they gave it by inhalation. You snorted it up your nose, basically, which is the way you catch the influenza. So they were offering 7 years of immunity with very few side effects. But that was rejected. And now we have an immunisation that changes a flu that changes each year for the surface antigens, and they guess, or they claim to guess, which one is coming. They say it's based on surveillance and things like that. And then they make each year a different immunisation, which is then given under the skin and doesn't provide the best form of immunity. Right? So we really can't rely on the current allopathic system to look after your health. In fact, if you look at the influenza product information, the stuff produced by the company that makes it, on the first page, it says no studies have been done that shows that this product reduces the incidence or the severity of influenza, right? And this is a medication they're seeking to make compulsory. Back in 1970-something, Richard Nixon tried to mandate compulsory immunisation for all federal employees, and they gave 300,000 people a dose of this influenza immunisation, and within months they had 30,000 cases of paralysis called Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's a shocking syndrome where you get your immunisation and a day to a week later you wake up with numbness in your feet or lack of movement in your feet, which then ascends to a variable height and you really don't know where it's going to stop until it stops. So sometimes it stops at your lower legs, other times it affects your arms. It's a frightening thing. Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so they stopped the immunisation as a compulsory thing, but 40 years later they're trying it again. But the technology of the immunisation hasn't worked. The important thing is we move into what I describe as pharmacofascism, right? That's using the medical system to enforce compliance to all sorts of things. It may be that you have children or grandchildren that if you don't get them immunised, you don't get the health benefits, you can't go to school, docs start circling like a pack of rabid wolves, sort of trying to take them away. All these things are very, very disturbing. And sometimes, even though we'd prefer to follow our own dictates of what we think is best for the kids, you may have to have them immunised. My take-home message for that is make sure they're fully loaded up with vitamin C in the week or two before you send them from immunisation. And what we learnt from Andrew Katelaris was that whilst immunisation can have reactions, and sometimes very severe reactions, they can be reduced dramatically by pre-treating the children with vitamin C. At one stage I was working in the Institute of Forensic Medicine investigating SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, and remember they've got very little idea of what's going on. You're confronted with this beautiful little baby with no signs of injury and simply not alive. And the government has a list of tests that we were to do on these children. We swabbed every orifice and every cavity and every fluid in their body for different viruses and did all these things. But based on Archie's work, I said, why don't we test tissue levels of vitamin C? Right? Because usually we get them fairly soon because it's an urgency thing. So it's not as though they've been dead for days in a fridge, and you can rely on the tissue levels of vitamin C. And within 5 or 6 cases, you could very rapidly see if the tissue levels of vitamin C were very low. And because of the safety of ascorbic acid, then the guidelines could be given, let's give all the kids a dose and see if we can eliminate SIDS altogether. They didn't want to know about it. The same thing happened with hepatitis C during the 90s. We, as histologists, were looking at slices of the liver, and we saw all this funny inflammation that didn't look like ordinary hepatitis. And we asked the government to do further testing, and they said, no, we're not interested in that. The people are dead. It doesn't really matter. And in that time, 300,000 people acquired hepatitis C, and now they're peddling a Havoni cure, which is a very effective cure, but it costs the country $60,000 to $80,000 per person. And you do the arithmetic if you've got 300,000 people affected. And we didn't need to have that. So that's why I refer to as pharmacofascism. They almost let the horse out of the paddock and then charge you a fortune to get it back in. It's a very sad state of affairs. Intravenous vitamin C is probably one of the most inexpensive substances around. You can buy in most health food shops a half a kilo of it for about $30 or $40. But the intravenous preparations for 30 grams, they'll charge you $120 at the wholesale price. So they're very, very heavily making it difficult for practitioners and patients to use the therapy when it's needed. Right? Now, I'm not saying it's a cure-all, and I'm not even saying that the vitamin C was the principal action in the New Zealand farmers' reversal of the leukemia. It was certainly a principal action against the virus, the influenza virus. The leukemia was probably, he had a prolonged period of fasting. And that is a very, very potent way to act against cancer. We've seen this where we've fasted patients for 5 or 6 days, and we've seen the cancer markers drop dramatically. So there's lots of ways to approach our different problems, but at the moment we're stuck in the allopathic mindset where you have the chemo, you have the radiation. Now they've come up with all these very, very expensive biological treatments, and they're talking about individualised medicine for cancer. But it's anything but that. It's still a one-size-fits-all, and you go through the steps of their treatment. And then after that's failed, they throw up their hands and send you to a hospice to die. It's a very, very ugly business, and it's entirely unnecessary. Okay? So the take-home message, right? Make sure your kids get enough vitamin C. There's very few problems with taking even high doses of vitamin C, but you don't need massive high doses, you just need regular doses. Now, I hope I'm not jinxing myself, but I mean, I've been taking moderate doses of vitamin C for 7 years, and I've never had a flu or a cold or anything like that, and that applies to most people. Linus Pauling pushed it for a long time, and they've done dozens of experiments, so-called controlled experiments, but they're so poorly controlled, they haven't had reliable results, which is the way they've been set up to do. They've never done a trial on a ketogenic diet in cancer, like what they call a double-blind, randomly controlled placebo, because you can't do it. And we don't believe that's the best way to go forward. You look at the historical literature. How did they treat people before they had all these chemo drugs? I think it was last year I told people how chemotherapy started. Were any of you here last year when I said that? Yeah, okay. I'll tell the story again, because chemotherapy, you think, oh, it's a medical procedure, it must have started by medical experimentation. Nothing like that. In 1943, during the Second World War, the Americans were invading Europe through southern Italy, and illegally, against all international covenants, they brought a freighter load of mustard gas, which was a World War I vintage poison gas, that just in case they wanted to throw some at the Germans. Their rationale after the event was that they thought the Germans might have had some, so they wanted to be sure they had some to throw back at them. Long story short, the Germans got wind of it and bombed the freighter in Bini Harbour in southern Italy and spread this toxic shit all over the place. And thousands of people died, both servicemen and civilians. It was all secret, as no one sort of was admitting to what was in there because it was illegal for them to have it in the first place. They brought army doctors in to investigate. And when they did the post-mortem on the dead soldiers, they found that their white cells had been dramatically reduced and their lymphoid tissue had atrophied to nothing. So they said, oh, let's try it in leukemia. And that's how chemotherapy got started, using cytotoxic drugs, right? It's not a very salubrious way to go forward, and it's actually very worthwhile knowing how the whole process started. Yeah?
Here it says, cancer results from the imbalance between oxidative stress damaging the cellular DNA and protective and reparative mechanisms which counter this. You said that at one time.
Yeah, not quite. Right, it's not the cellular DNA. This is really important. You can do your own research on this. Go and Google Otto Warburg. Otto Warburg was a German physiological scientist operating in the 1930s, and he got a Nobel Prize for discovering that most the cancers he looked at, and this applies especially to adult cancers and not the rare children's cancers, but the adult cancers, the first signs you saw of cancer was a destruction of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are a subcellular organelle that it's often described as the powerhouse of the cell. It's where the glucose is burnt to produce energy. Right? So the mitochondria are specialist organelles within the cell that have increased the efficiency of metabolizing glucose. And the first sign of cancer before it's really got out of control is damage or destruction of the mitochondria. So what happens because of the wrong dietary choices and ongoing oxidative stress, the membranes of the mitochondria are damaged and the glucose can no longer be metabolized with oxygen. So it's metabolized without oxygen, even though the oxygen is present, and that forms a lot of lactic acid within the cell, and the lactic acidosis within the cell disrupts the nucleus. Right? Now, this is really important that you brought that up. The allopathic model of cancer says that cancer starts in the nucleus. And indeed, I mean, I wish I knew all this when I was studying histology, because I used to look at thousands and thousands of cancer cells. And if I was aware of Otto Warburg's work, I could have confirmed it then. But you only see what you expect to see. And that's really sad. Unless you've got an exceptional mind, you tend to be led along by what other people have already seen. Like the Helicobacter organism in the gut. People have been looking at microscopic sections of the stomach for decades, but until a West Australian pathologist said, you see those tiny little red things there? No one saw them. Now everyone can see them. right? It really is a case of you have to be alert to things to actually see them, or simply don't see them. But the resolution to that, as to whether that statement is unequivocally true or Otto Warburg's intent is true, is very simply decided by an experiment called the nuclear transfer experiment. Now just imagine this, it's simple, but it's a very elegant experiment. You have two cells, a cancer cell and a normal cell. And you can, with a micropipette, you can take the nucleus out of each one and reverse them. So you take a cancer nucleus and put it in a normal cell. You take a normal cell's nucleus and put it in a cancer cell. If the allopaths are right and cancer starts in the nucleus, then if you take a cancer nucleus and put it in a normal cell, that cell should become cancerous, right? But that's not what happened. If you take a cancer nucleus and put it into a cell with normal mitochondria, it becomes normal. But if you take a normal nucleus and put it into a cancer cell with cancerous mitochondria, it becomes cancerous. The nuclear transfer experiment really proved that Otto Warburg was right and they were wrong. But like Warburg himself, they simply ignored it. Right? Now, this stuff is really critical because the preventative strategy for cancer is optimise the health of your membranes by taking in the right amount of omega-3 and minimise the amount of oxidative stress on the membranes, which damages the mitochondria. So we don't have to wait around and have tests every year, have a mammogram or have your colonoscopy and wait for the cancer and then line up for the chemo. That's a very, very sad way to live. You have to get into a mindset where health is your natural inheritance and you maintain that inheritance by living right. Right? You know, the angels of health, a healthy mind, healthy exercise, good water, good air to breathe, fresh vital food. These things can prevent cancer in 99% or more of the cases. Right? It's an entirely preventable disease in the adult form. It's a different attitude with some of the rare children's cancers. They do appear to be as a result of genetic mutations, but they are less than 1% of the total cancer burden. Right? So as far as the acquired adult cancers go, they're almost completely preventable disease. Now, something like 5G is on everyone's mind. 5G? Does anyone support the rollout of the 5G network? Sort of stick your head in a microwave and see how that feels, right? But it may be that I would much prefer that we won the battle in this country and we didn't have a 5G rollout. Instead, we rolled out in the longer term an optical cable which can connect us to an information superhighway that'll last 100 years and involve no radiation. But at this stage, it looks like they're going to try and roll out the 5G. If you can't physically avoid that by distancing yourself in the country and things, you can still somewhat protect yourself against the radiation, because whether it's ionising nuclear radiation or electromagnetic radiation, it damages the body by oxidative stress and sets up these free radicals, which then causes a cascade of injury to your cell membranes. But if you live right, if you have the right balance of omega-3 from the hemp seed and the flaxseed and the chia and those sorts of things, avocado, all those good foods, and you're eating enough coloured vegetables and fruits with the rainbow polyphenols, you can neutralise the damage it does. To a point, you can even neutralise the issue of radiation.